as we're looking at our godly communication. In our last session, we talked about thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. And this is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Last time we talked about our love relationship with God. But how is your love relationship with your neighbor? Who's your neighbor? Anybody that God puts around you. You know, we don't get to choose our neighbors. I can remember that when I was down in Florida and we moved, and we had a neighbor who would take and he would mow his lawn every Saturday morning at like 6 a.m. You know, that's the neighbor you don't want to have. All right? But then I've had some really good neighbors. Anything I needed, they were right there to help. When God puts people in your path, how do you treat them? How do you treat your family? They're your neighbors. Do you have a love relationship with those that God has put in your life? In RU, we have a definition of love. It is the sacrificial giving of oneself without the thought of anything in return. Are you always looking at what you get? Oh, I can be nice to this neighbor. I can love this neighbor because they do so much for me. Or, oh, I don't like that neighbor because they do this and this and this, and I don't like what they do. The fact is, it is important for us to humble ourselves and love anybody that God has put in our path. The scripture says that we can summarize all the commandments down to loving God and loving our neighbor. I think it's very important that as you walk through your Christian life, that you take and you work to focus on loving your neighbor, loving those that God has put in your path, even the unlovely. Sometimes I take and I get frustrated with people, and I don't want to have long-suffering. Last Friday night I was teaching on long-suffering, and before it I was making a decision on somebody who had been messing up, and I was pretty much done with them. I had talked to my director of housing and said, man, I'm pretty much done with this person. And then I preached on long-suffering. Right after RU, that person came running up to me, and he had a list of things he needed to work on, and then asked for material so that he could grow more. I got in my car after done and said, God's got a sense of humor. Because I preached on long-suffering tonight, and God gave me a chance to practice it right after RU. And you know, I could have said, no, you lost all your chances in that. But that's not my job. My job is to love the people God's put around me. Steve Currington, I once asked him, how do I know how much room to give a person? How do I give people extra chances, and when does that run out? And Steve Currington said to me, has God ever given you second chances? Yes, sir. And he said, what about God giving Scott Cowling another chance with that person? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Scott Cowling failed to give him the love of God the first time, and the second time, and the third time. He's just giving you another chance to minister. You know, I hope that we'll realize that it is not our job to judge others, but it is our job to love others. If you can remember that, your communication with others will be much better.